headline, suspected burglar, 19. He was shot dead during an alleged break-in at Peak District farmhouse. And the farmer is being quizzed on suspicion of attempted murder. And I asked the audience, somebody breaks into your house and you, I don't know, whack them with a cricket bat, or in the rural area, use a gun, because I'm thinking Tony Martin, that was like 30 years ago. When are you the criminal? When are you more criminal than the criminal breaking in, if that makes sense?
Well, yeah, very difficult one. And I think anybody who has a family, especially with vulnerable people, children in the house, some people that they feel that they've got a duty to keep safe, as most of us do, many of us do. It's one that strikes to the core of our sense of security. I'm very sympathetic to people who have anxieties in that regard. Yes, we can't comment on the facts of this case. The reality is we just don't know them. It'd be pointless anyway. But we can say that, of course, a 19-year-old boy is dead. He's somebody's son. That's always sad. The wider issue of defence of your property is that it must be proportionate. An Englishman's home is his castle, but when we use violence to defend ourselves, we must try to make sure that violence is proportionate. Now, that doesn't mean, Trisha, if you go a little bit too far, or you hit the guy an extra few times, or if you use a knife because you don't know what they might have, that all of a sudden you're going to become down on. As a matter of public policy, but also legally, the courts have historically and consistently made allowance for people who are acting out of anxiety, that in a situation they did not create, because there's an intruder in their house and they're operating in the agony of the moment. That said, and on that, self-defense gone too far, it really has to be way too far before it actually amounts to a criminal offence. Think about the idea of killing somebody rather than putting them out of action. You can put somebody out of action and seriously injure them just to make sure, but you don't have to carry on stabbing them with the kitchen knife. Now, guns will always be problematic, because guns will, I'm not talking about the specifics of this case. I just don't know them. But for example, the shooting of Fred Barras in the back by Tony Martin.
That was disgusting. Do I remember rightly, Joseph, that in that particular case, Tony Martin went up to Fred Barras after, and he was lying on the ground, having either fallen down or being shot. I forget. And then, as the guy dying on the ground, shoots him in the back. I mean, that is.
The absolute detail I'm not familiar with. It's 24 years ago in law school, 19 years ago in law school that I last looked at the case in detail. But the interesting thing, he was convicted of murder the first time around, but there was a documentary on television around the same time. And the thing that surprised me is that when he was describing what was going on during his appeal proceedings and everything, he was obviously seriously mentally ill. And I don't say that lightly. He was completely wired, and more than just stress. It was no surprise to me, amateur psychiatrist that I am, when in fact his appeal on the basis of diminished responsibility, because he should only have been convicted of manslaughter. He was not a well man in all the circumstances. That was an appropriate one. I think it was right that wasn't murder, but you can't go around shooting, in this case, a teenage boy, Fred Barras, in the back. I can't remember if it was once or multiple times, with a gun, because you're generally concerned they might steal something from you. That's just not proportionate. For that reason, I think the availability on farms, which are very vulnerable to, because they're not particularly secure, and there's often valuable machinery and stuff. I grew up on a farm. I know the insecurities people have, but at the same time, shotguns are typically for good reason available to people, and it's the first thing that you grab, but it's not an appropriate weapon to deal with, in that case, a teenage burglar.